Kasumba zone. This is in Ndeva, which falls in Rubaga. And what an opportune moment that we do have an area leader, one who represents the president in the area code, to be able to speak to the people, word of encouragement, but also in such cases, what is the commitment from the side of government to help these businesses wake up once again. Good morning to you, Mr. Henry Chitambule.
Yes, good morning, how are you, Priscilla, and my colleagues here, plus the viewers. It's really a very, very terrible morning for our people in Kasumba zone in Ndeva. I got a call at around 11 at night that fire had caught the businesses, and you know that the businesses around there rotate around the timber, and when you have fire catching timber, it can spread very, very fast. I want to thank our colleagues, the fire, because indeed they responded very fast. Only that by the time they came, fire had spread like nothing. I will not make any commitments, but one, to sympathize with our people. Number two, from here, I'm going to have a crisis meeting between the leaders of the traders, the local leaders, and my team, to see what we can do as a government, because we need to know what they really require. I've heard some talking about iron sheets,
replacement of the machines,
talking about the poles. I heard my vice chairperson talking about it. So we need to know exactly what they require in terms of the first assistance, and then we see how they can be helped to put up their business. So we are going to have a crisis meeting, and then what will come out of that meeting is what we shall communicate to the office of the Prime Minister, because if we have such disasters, then it is always the office of the Prime Minister that comes in very fast to rescue the situation.
All right. Still staying on that matter, there are recommendations that the fire commissioner did make mention of that have been recommended. Him stating that this is not the first time this area is facing an inferno of this magnitude. And one of the things that he talked about is a hydro point or hydro points around that area, given the nature of business that is there. And the second thing that he talked about is walkways for people, pedestrians. These are things that are really in the hands of the government and the authority by and large to be provided so as to have public safety.
I think it comes back to KCCA, because when you look at the nature of our city, many areas do not have water hydrants. So in the case of any fire, the fire team always struggle to look for where they can get water from. And of course the other thing is the way our people construct. Somebody constructs and does not leave any space where the vehicle can pass. We have always complained, and I think we have advised the physical planning department of KCCA to ensure that they put in place, they actually punish those who do not want to leave walkways or routes that can lead fire and maybe ambulances to the places in case we have such incidents. So it's really a challenge that we have in the city. I don't blame the ones that are here, because those that were there before, I think because of a few things and maybe sleeping on the jobs, the construction wasn't in line with the physical planning regulations. So it's a challenge, and we need to address it, because if we don't address it now, then we shall have to suffer a lot in the future with this city.
Okay.
When I was in Ginger, I advised them to install water hydrants, and I think they have started doing it. And I think for them, when you look at the way their stay is planned, in the case of anything, you always have a way out, or you can always drive very fast to where the place, I mean the incident has taken place. The ambulances can reach, the fire vehicles can reach, which is not the case with the Kampala. But the other thing, I think we are going to carry out a massive sensitization campaign. Issues of leaving a fire you are cooking at night. In places like that, it's really very dangerous.
Right.
You leave a sigiri, you leave this and that. I think we need to sensitize our people that if you are working in an environment like that one, then don't leave any fire, don't leave any sigiri in that area, because anything can happen. Even wind can blow.
Yeah, we have seen that happening, the wildfires in America, so we definitely understand how the climate can also contribute to the state of fires for us here as a country and as a community. But we'll be keeping you abreast with that across our social media platforms. Getting into the discussion of the day, Kickstarter this Monday morning is looking to assess the 2021-2026 NRM manifesto fulfillment and what are the checks and balances, monitoring and evaluation really, and recapturing the government's promises to Ugandans. As we are heading into May, we get to look at another year being met since the NRM assumed government, with another mandate bearing promises, bearing pledges to us as citizens by the party. Now, these pledges contained in the NRM manifesto are essential for the social contract that is signed between the party as well as the Ugandans, who trust it that for the next 5 years, which we are in the 4th year, you get to see that there's some fulfillments that are made on a national level in different sectors and priority areas. And so this morning we look into the successes, we also look into the failures, and what are the commitments of the NRM government and its manifesto given the remaining term period of the term that they have. And so of course we've heard from Henry Chitambuda, who is from Rubaga RCC, and then we're also being joined by Dr. Sarah Birete, Executive Director with the Center for Constitutional Governance. Good morning to you, Doctor.
Good morning, Priscilla. Good morning, fellow panelists and viewers. I'm glad to be back on Morning at NTV.
It's always a pleasure to have you. And of course, Mr. Timothy Chemongas, political analyst. Good morning to you.
Good morning, Priscilla. Good morning to colleagues in the panel and our viewers. Glad to be here.
All right.
Yeah.
I will start with you, Mr. Timothy, asking ourselves the poignant question before we dive into analyzing the manifesto for the NRM. The bigger, more fundamental question we need to establish answers to is, what is a manifesto and what are the obligations that should be lying in a manifesto for any given party? Yeah.
So thank you so much, Priscilla. Before weighing into the discussion, I thought I could comment on our earlier discussion that the RCC here had. I think that we ought to avoid the reactionary approach in incidences that happen in the country. We are today facing the challenges that you've shown on the TV here. We've had challenges in the markets. We've had challenges in the very prime areas of where there are fuel areas without very clear planning. And many of these things, upon within days, we move on very quickly without putting in place what should be put in place in terms of the recommendations. And that has been evidenced by the commissioner there. So I think moving forward, we ought to be very, very deliberate in how we address these things. Fires in the market, most likely we may come back to that discussion when we find another fire. Our colleagues who have been affected, most likely after this, if nothing happens, we may revisit this discussion after the same incident happened. So I think it's a call on government and the other stakeholders to be more programmatic in addressing most of these challenges. All
right, so we'll pick up the discussion on the manifesto in the next hour. Maybe Sarah, you also have something to say on the Inferno and you know, how these communities are being affected by laxity somewhere, somehow.
Kampala, capital city, has a planning crisis. The mushrooming petrol stations are just a disaster in waiting. The way some of the markets are structured, of course, the emergency and response ways, the need for water points, the need for walkways. If you have a fire vehicle trying to save timber in Endeavour, where does it pass? I've been to that place several times. There is a crisis. So people who plan these areas for people to go about their economic activities need to go back to the drawing board, redesign the city, and make sure that the city has points for rapid response in case of fire outbreaks, but also prevent the causes of fires. Most of them is careless electric wiring, or like the cooking utensils that are abandoned. So you find that most of the causes of these fires are preventable if there was an element of sensitization. So we need to go back to the drawing board.
Mm-hmm. All right, we definitely will be going back to the drawing board, also on the discussion matter, right after this break. I'll kickstart this morning looking to the 2021-2026 NRM manifesto fulfillment in a check, and of course recapturing the government's promises to you as the Ugandan. My guests this morning, I do have Henry Chitambula, Deputy RCC with Rubaga, Dr. Sarah Birete, Executive Director, Center for Constitutional Governance, and Mr. Timothy Chemongeza, political analyst. And of course, the first question to which we want to lay answers and the fundamental ground for is, what is a manifesto and what are the obligations that are intended to be in a manifesto for any given party?
So thank you so much, Priscilla, for that. A manifesto is really a contract or a basis for which political party seeks to, lead the country. And it's an embodiment of what the political party envisages to implement if they get the mandate. So each of the political parties in any elections will always come up with a manifesto. They vary depending on their vision, depending on how the political party looks at what they seek to achieve, but also from the values of the political party. For many times, the items in most of these manifestos are not very much different. Sometimes they are packaged differently, really. And so you find that even when one seeks to gets the mandate, sometimes there is need for that symbiotic approach in addressing this. For the case of Uganda, for the NRM party, which has been in place since 1986, you of course would want to look at each term with a different manifesto, but all feeding into each other. And for this specific term for which they were able to conduct the midterm assessment of their manifesto, which actually had close to 809 commitments, varying in different areas. I've seen the report. It really highlights a couple of progress in terms of what has been able to be realized. They indicate that they've been able to realize up to 84% success rate of their manifesto, with close to that 4% which has been achieved, 48% ongoing, and 35% with 16% which have not yet been realized yet. In terms of being able to assess that with what is happening on ground is definitely something that would be able to weigh in properly and look at even whether the items that are highlighted in there resonate with what's on ground.
All right, representing the NRM, Mr. Chitambula, of course, as he has rightly mentioned, when we were going into the previous elections, there's commitments that were made, 809 of them in key areas, 5 of which we'll be looking into details of. But it begs the question, the overall performance by the government right now to its citizens and the promises that you made so far, are you on the right track?
Thank you very much. First of all, I want to expand a bit on the manifesto, and because these are commitments we make, these are promises we make, and each party must make a manifesto. Only that in Uganda, you only find one party with at least a manifesto that is public. Others, at times, you look at them and you don't see them. Now, when you look at, when you're making a manifesto, for example, in NRM, there are factors we follow, or there are issues we follow. Number one, we look at what we call the National Development Plan. What is in the National Development Plan? Because you cannot make a manifesto from out of the blue. Then number two, we look at, for example, the 2030 agenda for sustainable development, those goals. And when we look at all of that, then we come up with what can best suit our country. And that's why you are seeing that we made all those commitments to the people of Uganda. And our manifesto has a theme, securing our future, securing your future. And it's only premised on around 5 areas. One is the job creation and wealth, job and wealth creation. Number two is delivering education, health and water. Number three is ensuring justice and equity. Number four is protection of life and property. And then number five is achieving economic and political integration. So those are the 5 areas where we really focused when we were making the manifesto. As is mentioned, we have covered so far 84%. We haven't covered 16%. But I want to remind you that after elections, remember we went into elections when we had COVID-19. And COVID-19 affected almost the first financial year, the first political year, because the economy was down. And then as we were recovering from COVID-19, of course, the other wars also, like the Ukraine and Russia war also intensified. So we were affected by a number of factors. Nevertheless, we have tried to perform in all the sectors of the economy. When you look at job creation and wealth creation, you have seen that we have really focused much on those 39% Ugandans who were in total poverty, and we are supporting them with the punishment model resolving fund under their circles. So we want them to have jobs instead of working for only the stomach. Then when you look at the industrialization, the industries were put in place. In fact, when you look at that report from the Office of the Prime Minister, it shows you that we have created additional over 1 million new jobs, over 1 million jobs created. So that means we are moving. When you look at the other enablers of the economy, the electricity, we are now talking about 2,048 megawatts. That's really something that we need to be proud of. You remember last year we added 600 megawatts for Karuma. When you go to the roads are now in 6,000 kilometers, and we are working on more. Look at Kampala where we are. Much as you have issues with your planners, but for us as central government, we are doing our work.
When you say your planners, what do you mean?
Your planners, the ones you train to, and we give jobs to assist the government in the city. When you look at the flyovers, these flyovers, we have constructed in Kampala. First of all, they are discongesting that area, those areas where they are. Then number two, people, even security-wise, people can move without being attacked as it was during that time when we had the face boys. Actually, Kampala, we have constructed a number of roads during this term. I think it's one of the areas where many roads have been constructed, because Rubaga alone, the roads under construction now, they are in around 10, 11. So that is something that it's a tangible achievement. And then when you go to the other areas, of course, economic integration comes with security and so on and so forth. We have remained secure for some time. We had the ADF attacking us, but right now we have, I think, overcome this because our friends in the DRC allowed us to go and even pursue these people from their areas. So the enablers, when we talk about the economic enablers, we are moving in the right trajectory. And I have no doubt by the end of this term, we shall even have improved, because this term takes us up to May next year.
Okay.
So we still have that time to perform. Of course, the challenges, there are challenges.
We'll come to the challenges. Let's first assess the report that you have shared with us so far. Sarah, he talks about the 5 focal areas, and he says that at least as government, they have been able to move 84%. The underlying question for me there is that, do we assess 84% to be at 100%, or just because they have started on a road, just because they have budgeted for something that is equivalent to it falling under 84%? And from where you are seated, are you feeling the impact of what that manifesto committed securing the future?
Well, first of all, we need to underscore the fact that this is a self-assessment. Any person, if they were asked whether they were doing well, they would say they are doing well, because maybe they are trying their best. So should we take it as a matter of fact? No. Let's look at the critical areas that the manifesto stands on, or the pillars of the manifesto. Wealth creation, wealth and job creation. Yes, the parish development model project has been rolled out with challenges, and the first report of the PDM said they had 30% ghost recipients, ghost circles that received the PDM money. So you could use that as a challenge. But also the biggest challenge with PDM is that the pillars, there are 7 pillars of PDM. Most of them have been abandoned, especially financial literacy, and the focus is on distributing money. So it's not likely to get its intended objectives, given that the pillars of PDM have been abandoned. When you come to the other, of course there is a Myoga and other projects also for giving out money that have largely been patronized or gazetted for NRM, supporters. When a party wins power, you are a president for everyone. When you are dispensing taxpayers' money, it's not party funds that you gazette for your supporters. So that discrimination in distribution of Myoga funds, some of it was found to be situated in NRM offices, is wrong. You don't use taxpayers' money for party benefit or party patronage. So that's also another, challenge with the manifesto.
When you put it that way, you remind me of some of the statements that the party chairman has made, now also that the president has made, in regards to why there's low service delivery or poor service deliveries in some sectors.
Those who vote
in
opposition,
some areas,
it's very fraudulent.
Who they have voted for in the area.
It's a very wrong statement for a president to make. You are a president for everyone, and you are using public money. You are not using party funds. So if it's a party, an NRM program based in Chadondo where they're using their party resources, it's fine. But when you are interacting with taxpayers' money and you make those scandalous partisan statements, it's very wrong and unconstitutional for that matter. So when you come to the second pillar of education and health, I will refer you to the Equal Opportunities Commission report on the crisis in education. First of all, from enrollment at primary 1 to higher education, we have 92% dropout. People who enroll for primary school. At primary level, we have 50% school dropout. There has been debates on whether we have free education or not, whether parents should pay or not. But we budget for 20,000 per year per child at primary. What can you do with 20,000 shillings to educate a child? We have primary schools that have been washed away by these weather changes. We have seen people, sitting exams in floods, flooded the classrooms. We have seen people struggling to close schools. So there is a crisis in the primary school education that is clearly captured in the 2024 Equal Opportunities Commission report on how we are failing to provide for quality and equal education in this country. On pillar number 3, justice and equity, of course, that's now a crisis. And then I want to use just this morning's event, today morning's event, to demonstrate the crisis in civil and political rights in this country. There is a story that police has stopped a press conference at the National Unity Platform headquarters. And of course, one of the bodyguards for the principal for NUP, Edo Mutwe, is missing, was abducted yesterday. So when you have the overreach of police, the Public Order Management Act under Section 4 exempts activities of any registered organ at their offices. It also, further in subsection 3, exempts activities of a registered political party in the day-to-day conduct of their work. Police has no business. So you have police banning, and I'm sure they are going to brutalize people at NUP headquarters today. That's the failure of the pillar number 3, justice and equity. It doesn't under the manifesto. 84%. And actually at Crown with this Sanja, since 2020, it has been characterized with abductions, kidnaps and torture of the opposition, including the abduction of Edo Mutwe yesterday. So meaning that the business of justice and equity is kidnaps, abductions and torture of people who don't support NRM. I don't know whether that qualifies as justice and equity in their language. So when you come to protection of life and property, of course we have protection of life includes the forced disappearances, abductions, is a failure of the state to protect its citizens. We still have 18 persons missing from the 2021 elections and abductions. So the state has carried through this kind of forced disappearances of its citizens throughout this term. I don't know whether that qualifies as a protection of life and whether they want to score it as 84. In my view, it's not. When it comes to protection of property, maybe there has been reduced incidences of state-instigated violence, border 2010, face. All these agencies were linked to police in the previous days. So what they have done is to minimize that state thuggery that they were perpetrating and torturing people. When it comes to economic and political integration, I want to pick out the example of the fuel monopoly that was realized under this term, where government took over the supply of fuel products with the promise to control prices and make sure that Ugandans have affordable fuel products to, facilitate the economic development. Just last week, the Daily Monitor captured details of rising pump prices. So where is this monopoly and where is the promise of reduced fuel consumption in the country? On that one, even they have failed. So if you look at all these issues, cutting across, electricity, as I conclude, we have increased road shading after the exit of Umeme. I don't know who is not experiencing it. We have like road shading 3 times a day, or from 10 p.m. to the next day. Evening, people are running back to backups and, draconian measures of providing for power. Just 1 month after exit of Umeme. So where is this stable electricity that we are talking about in this Sanja?
Mr. Chemongez, would you have something good to say of the manifesto and the 84% that they are proud to say they have moved so far?
Dr. Sarah said all the bad things.
No. She has, on the table there's always 2 sides. So on your side, you have taken yourselves at 84%.
You eliminated
but where she's seated on her side of the table, the things are not looking as you are painting them to be. It begs the question, Mr. Chemongez, where you are seated as one who is a citizen, then an analyst on the matter, do you feel that the NRM is actually securing the future in the 4 years that they've had this manifesto running?
So I think that I want to associate with the submissions of Dr. Sarah here. There's been quite a bit of shortfalls in realizing the manifesto, but also, of course, recognizing that while there have been a bit of successes that government has registered, including the extension of electricity to West Nile. I've engaged with a couple of colleagues there, and they seem to be very, very proud. Where you see West Nile has been connected to the national grid. There are also quite a number of other items that government has been able to realize.
So let's first talk about the successes, because it also does us no good to sit here and bash without realizing that there's some good things that have also taken place courtesy of this manifesto. Let's first talk about the successes.
So I want to start with the understanding that at the time when this specific term was starting, it was a crisis time, and amidst the challenges that the government has been able to face, there has been a bit of stabilization of the economy, because then you had COVID, you had what you had highlighted of the external challenges, we had other crises that came on board, and most of those, amidst that, there's been a bit of stabilization. Now, in terms of being able to realize, because you see, most of this surrounds from the governance perspective, where you have, if you have very clear perspectives in how resources are utilized, in how the question of the rule of law is dispensed, the democratic aspects of the country, if those are failed, sometimes you find that even the little that you've been able to realize are washed down. The other is really to also highlight that there's a fundamental problem in how this information is dispensed to the public, and how the manifesto as planned by the government is even brought to the attention of the people for a proper assessment. The self-assessment, as highlighted, it's ideally expected to be on the positive, and all this, looking at the report that the President's Office, the monitoring unit, highlights, it's a pure success report as presented to the country. But there are quite a number of shortfalls ranging from how we've administered the question of corruption, and even how we just look at the question of corruptions both in the government but also how the citizens relate. Because again, when you look at the challenges that are being faced in the education sector, the dropouts, the access to the state of our teachers who support in the education system. We have challenges in the healthcare system, ranging to the availability even of medicine. I looked at the Auditor General's report, and it highlights quite saddening stories, where you have quite a number of resources going to purchase medicines that are eventually, not utilized. They are destroyed. The questions of the PDM having ghost entities receiving money, but even to how that money is being perceived, it seems to be a reward as opposed to it coming to resolve a specific issue. We've continued to see a challenge around how government, manages these many programs. They seem to be more of bonanzas as opposed to the overall objective. I've seen the president has moved around the country, making an assessment of the PDM, and much of what we see are the success stories. But when you go on ground, you definitely see that there are still gaps in how this should be realized. Quite a number of people are not even equipped enough to have most of these models administered. The Emioga program, the question of corruption, how they are administered, I think the concept may be okay, but at the point of administering this is fundamentally flawed. So maybe just to highlight on the two things around the key areas of let's say creation of jobs and wealth creation, assessing that and seeing whether indeed the people are in a better place compared then. You'll see that if you had an assessment of a random Ugandan to assess whether there has been a success, most likely you will see that what is being highlighted as jobs is not reflecting. And also looking at the quality of these jobs. We've seen a number of them paying fairly below what we would actually imagine, others receiving as low as 5,000, 3,000 shillings. The question of education, I think, has been highlighted. There are quite a number of shortfalls there. The issues to do with the economy. I see the report highlights that there has been a significant stabilization of the inflation rate, and currently at around 3.3%, but 3.2%. But even with that, you see that you see other things happening. You see the rise in the fuel prices, and many of those challenges. Is it clear? But lastly, I think that I'd also want to weigh in terms of the rule of law, the democracy, which many times shadows most of these things. As highlighted, you see that political parties cannot administer, even engage with their members and the electorate in a manner that ideally should be provided as provided for in the Constitution and the legal framework, which is a fundamental breach. Secondly, in terms of how institutions of government have continued to operate, first at the level of their ability to actually independently administer most of their decisions, their mandate, there is quite a bit of shortfall there. But also highlighting that when you look at institutions such as Parliament, which is at the core and at the center of any democratic dispensation, looking at the challenges that are happening there, concerns around distribution of resources that ideally should be serving the citizens. What does that speak, to a citizen that is listening, that you have a member of Parliament receiving, there would be a bribe, development, 100 million shillings. Which goes to one parish. The institutions more than ever seem to be serving the political class, the elite group, as opposed to serving the interests of the people. So I think that for a fair assessment, while there are a couple of things that have been realized, and there are those that have been already, there are those that are ongoing. Of course, government has adopted the approach of starting projects and then sometimes leaving it there and counting that as success, with the hope that as of the midterm, you count yourself to have achieved 84%, and to probably a citizen who may not be able to go deep into this may actually may understand that this government is performing extremely well. Okay. But we should be able to juxtapose that with what's happening
mostly in local government. But we have addressed it. The local governments could begin projects and then leave them there, but we are addressing it.
All right. There's another element of assessment or evaluation that I'd like us to look at.
But before that, because when you are from government and the people allege you must correct the impression. First of all, Doctor, this is not just self-evaluation, not just self-assessment. When the most trusted entity globally is the World Bank. So the World Bank estimates our economic growth to be at 6.1%, and the size of the economy to be at approximately 55 billion US dollars. So this is not our assessment.
No, I mean the assessment of the manifesto.
The midterm review report.
Assessment by NRM.
Okay.
But backed,
so on that assessment, Doctor, let's talk about
the
how
bodies.
The NRM is actually responding to crisis. Because take for example, each one of us, as we were making our way to the studio this morning, we came face to face with challenges in one way or another. So challenges are part of the journey for any party and any manifesto to undertake. However, how they get to respond to those challenges, how they get to deal with those challenges, how they get to resolve the challenges, and then quickly move on to ensure that there's better delivery of their commitments at the end of the day. I would like to hear your assessment of the NRM manifesto in that regard when it comes to crisis management of the different elements that we have seen throughout just these 4 years. How have they handled that?
Well, to give credit, the NRM government has done well in responding to health emergencies, be it COVID-19 pandemic, be it Ebola, be it has managed well by the pandemics, health emerging crises.
For the first time. I wish you could add. And managing the immunizable.
I'm coming to the challenge we faced when we are coming here. Where the government has failed, and given that this is a 4-decade same government in place, is the failing to manage rising traffic in the city. I know that Bwana RCC mentioned roads being constructed, but these are narrow roads. You have
big, and then by the time of completion of the project, it's a small road.
Also roads being repaired in the city, revamped. It's just single lane. You know, just 2 lanes, left to right. Like, which country still does such roads? When you travel to the rest of Africa, Kenya, Zambia, Rwanda, name it, people have gone to 4-lane roads. Mm-hmm. But it's only in Uganda where you find somebody celebrating highway roads, and everything is just a narrow road. So we have failed to, develop an infrastructure concept of accommodating a developing and growing population under NRM. That's why we struggle with getting, for example, here, traffic jam, even if you wake up at 5, traffic jam in Kampala. Mm-hmm. If you compare to Nairobi, they were able to demystify traffic jam with that wide expressway. Everybody is able to move 30 minutes. You get wherever you are going at any time of the day in Nairobi. But you come to Kampala, 2 hours in traffic jam. This regime has failed to address its mind to the need to expand roads. And of course, because of the land grabbing crisis, the other element of bad governance under NRM is that most of the road reserves has been encroached, and by powerful people that you cannot just
strategic encroachment.
Yeah, of course, a regime-aided encroachment of road reserves. So even when somebody wants to plan a bigger road, there is no land. And if we were to borrow a leaf from Dar es Salaam, they build outside the road so that nobody encroaches on the road reserve, it's left in the middle. So we have failed to buy these simple concepts that other African countries are doing, and we have failed the citizenry in the urban developing, in the urban centers because of the time lost in traffic jam. 4 hours of working day per day. Nobody has addressed their mind to this. So when you come to the issue, again, the crisis that we face is weak institutions. For example, the traffic crisis. Do we have efficient implementation of traffic rules and penalties? You have people like Bwana RCC here, if we are leaving and he wants to go overthrowing citizens from roads, he will just use his lead car and he will be overthrowing people. So you have abuse of lead cars, abuse of, emergency travels in the country. We don't even have an emergency lane in the country. We don't. It's only a bit of an express highway that has a faster lane, the one going to the airport that has a faster lane, but other roads don't even have an emergency. Even when you want to rescue people to hospitals, where do you pass? So that failure of fundamental planning at that level, when we have the Kampala blueprint plan since 1970s, that people have failed to implement in this country. So when it comes to broader governance and weak institutions, I thought I should add a voice on that. Okay. Really, governance institutions have been weakened. Even when we sit here and we are not talking about, looking for, you need like a microscope to look for achievements. Because of the broader governance crisis, if you have the president, and he put it in writing, bribing the legislature with 100 million per legislature, part of classified expenditure that is meant for the national security of the country. And he puts it in writing.
Did the president say that he gave them?
Yes. He's read, and even a SEC member confirmed.
All right.
He did.
So the statement, the supposed, does it mean that he gave it out?
He gave
That's
it
supposed
out.
100
Even
million.
a second member who was
No,
in the
does that
meeting for
statement
that
mean
money.
that the money was given?
Honorable Wanyoto has been on video confirming that she was in a meeting and then the president gave out that money to all MPs. That's a second member of NRM. So when you have such tendencies, then it becomes difficult to now start justifying that there is free primary education of 20,000 per year to poor children.
And yet the costs of living are going up. Now let's look at one particular thematic area that I think has been most sound for this particular manifesto. That is wealth creation and job creation, promising to translate economic growth and development registered through programs like the PDM. And there's also critical sectors that have been focal through this manifesto. One is agriculture, industrialization. I know that the president has been very vocal about industrialization, commercial agriculture, and as well as services and ICT. Where are we standing on these particular sectors?
I think the performance is good. With the PDM, we have seen the increase in production in agriculture. We are trying to very much work on how to improve storage, then how to process, and then market, because that is pillar number one for PDM. In fact, we are not doing badly in agriculture when it comes to production, because for the last, I think, even when we had wealth creation, OWC, they tried very much to ensure that they could give our people seeds and seedlings like coffee. So that's why you are seeing coffee production is high. That's why you're seeing generally the agricultural production is high. On ICT, we are moving on well, and industrialization, that one we have no doubt we are moving on well. Much as my colleague here did mention that those who are working in these industries are earning something very, very little, as small as 5,000. That one is understandable, but it's the start. It's the start, because our industries are also growing.
Yeah, it's a start, but you see, as the party or government in ruling right now, you also have the mandate and the power to bargain for those people not to be able to.
Yes, we can bargain.
You have the power to put into a law that can be able to put a cap on their minimum wages.
I don't want to mention factories, but when you look at, for example, Ginger, where I was, we had a number of them, and they could pay depending on their capacity. So there is one that could pay almost, I think, around 20,000. Even a civil servant would admire going to work there. Then there are those that could pay like 5,000 a day, and so on and so forth. But deliberately we have not come up with a minimum wage, because for those who did economics, you can set a minimum. You can have a minimum wage, which is not necessarily a living wage. Still, people will suffer. So, we said, for now, let us maintain that status and support our factories to grow, and then we shall see how to handle the issues of the minimum wage. Now, one thing I want to also correct: PDM is not for only NRM, not for NRM only. PDM is for all the Ugandans who are working for the stomach. And in the implementation, we are not only giving this money to NRM, because I'm a monitor. And when you look at the Parish Development Committee, that committee that oversees the implementation of PDM, especially this pillar number 5, financial inclusion, that committee comprises of the local leadership at the parish level, the youth chairperson at the parish. We don't want to know which color or which political party the youth is, the elderly chairperson, the WD chairperson, the chairperson for women council at the parish, and then of course the chairperson of the LC2. Now this chairperson of NRM that is put on that committee, his work is not to dictate who should get the money. His work was to oversee, to also monitor on behalf of the party in government, to see how this PDM is being implemented, not necessarily dictating who should receive this money. In fact, the members themselves, because before you come to the circle, we have the enterprises, the group enterprises, or the enterprise or the groups. Now, the leadership of these enterprises are the ones who look at themselves and say, really, this one is worse than all of us, can really have the first priority of getting the money. So I wanted to correct it because I don't know whether where you are getting it.
All right. Assessing industrialization in particular, Mr. Chemonges, I'd like to hear from you, your school of thought. We do have recently Cabinet having approved to have at least an industry in as many regions as possible. And
industrial parks,
about 25 to 27 of them. However, with the hope of creating many jobs, over 600 jobs for people. The question is, the approvals are made in Cabinet, but the realization and bearing of fruit of those approvals always takes a long time. And some scholars are of the view that the time period it takes to implement some of these things is intended to benefit the party more than to benefit the people.
That's true. And you know, the irony is upon planning, that is registered as work in progress. And for many times, you know, for most of this planning, they ought to come with budgeting. There's need for resources allocated for this, most of this. Are they allocated as they should? I think there is quite a bit of delays in that area. But many times is as to what would be regarded as success for the government, and if success also is regarded as having planned and identified an area to register or to put in place a factory or a park. I think that will be the most easier area, most easy option that they would take. But broadly speaking, I think that we have a fundament. We have a good approach in terms of coming up with plans, but in terms of actualizing them, but also because I have had conversations with many of the colleagues at the National Planning Authority, and they've shown me many of the reports, many of the planning compositions that they've been able to come up with and shared with the government. But for most of those, they are not taken into consideration. I think that the politics of the day seems to be superseding most of the things that should override. Again, the politics has overridden the planning factor. You know, we have the National Development Plan, which should be the guiding document for the government or for the country. For many times, you see that if you juxtapose, for example, the question of the budgeting of most of these items to what has been provided for in the national, the NDPs, you find that there is a wide gap in most of those. What could be explaining that? I think it's the question of the politics of the day, the governance questions, but also the overwhelming perspectives in terms of priorities for the government of the day. You know, as we proceed now towards the general elections, where you see that everyone is trying to run to ensure that they can register successes, they can be able to win the electorate on their side in terms of what has been done. But ultimately, I think that what should be able to count are the tangible things that the citizens can be able to see, but also be able to have the citizens be part of this process. Again, if you have an assessment being conducted, and it's purely conducted as an internal process, where you have citizens not involved, citizens seem not to understand what is happening, calling that a fair assessment would be, you'll be under positioning yourself, really. Okay. So I think there's quite a bit in terms of ensuring that even when we have most of these planning components, most of these programs, the PDM, because if you look at the conceptual framework for most of these programs, they seem to be brilliant, but at the implementation level, most of them have faced the same challenges. The question of corruption, the poor workmanship, but also it seems to be that many people who are actually implementing many of these programs seem not to understand what actually they're implementing.
Okay.
You have PDM, for example, lastly, that has 7 pillars. Those that are implementing seems to find fashion to focus on financial inclusion, leaving out the other 6 pillars, which you may want to assess that whether it's indeed success if you're focusing
so
only
perhaps they're
on
keeping the other 6 pillars for the next
they are
manifesto.
being implemented. Those are the pillars.
When we look at the National Development Plan that you've mentioned, Dr. Sarah, you do have their manifesto aligning with the NDP3 to avoid overlapping in some of the programs. So you see that it's primarily in the next 5 planning years, the intention is to have a program-based budgeting and framework. Is that a strategy that is going to lead us to the desired growth and development that we want to see for the country in the next 5 years?
Well, I think the way, first of all, the way we are going about program budgeting is more of sugarcoating. You have summaries in program budgeting, human development, agriculture and ICT. But when you go to the budgets that are approved and discussed by Parliament, they are individual, MDA budgets. So you find that this program budgeting at the top that does not trickle down, first of all, is meant to hide money, but also because it takes away scrutiny. The budgets that are scrutinized and approved by Parliament are not the budgets that are communicated on top, because we are still doing single entity budgeting. So why is this program budgeting, and why are we doing a dual approach? If it's program budgeting, it should be program budgeting. If it's single entity budgeting, like we've been doing all the time, it should be one. So this dual budgeting is meant to take away scrutiny and hide monies that are not clearly scrutinized.
Mr. Stambler, I'm going to give you the closing on this. What can be done to correct the wrongs that have been mentioned on this table? But also, are there any reforms that are under discussion to ensure that by the end of the term, you have up to 100%?
Of course, the wrongs are not so many, as Sarah is putting it, Dr. Sarah is putting it. But one thing I can agree with the colleagues here, the issue of corruption. We need to address the issue of corruption in the implementation of our programs. The good thing we're having is that on the budgeting process, the districts and local governments generally come up with their own budgets. They have a budget conference. So they generate what should constitute our budgeting process. And we want to really thank them for that.
All right.
However, lastly, Dr. Sarah, I think we need to have a discussion, you and I, on how we should really proceed. We need this Uganda. We need people. We need peace. So if there is anything that somebody has done, and the police thinks that there is a likelihood of crime, then we should always allow police to do its work.
In accordance with the Constitution.
All right.
They haven't.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for your submission.
And that's why you have not taken them to court.
Of Uganda.
We shall be back here to assess the full manifesto in the 5 years.
Then you also advise your people as you are going into politics.
Who is in Nkumba University. Now, Nkumba University has been able to conduct an election, and the question is, was it a free and fair election? Good morning to you, Ivan.